Welcome, welcome, welcome to this Whole Life Action Hour. This is Ocean Robbins, and I am thrilled you are with us. You know, one of the great myths about natural medicines is that they're not scientific. But the fact of the matter is that for most common illnesses, there is a greater support in the medical literature for a natural approach than there is for drugs or surgery. Natural approaches work with the body instead of fighting it. They favor natural compounds over synthetic chemicals, and they're available to everybody regardless of patents and lobbyists and insurance company dogma. Foods and herbs are at the forefront of natural medicine and the natural medicine revolution, and from altering the expression of your DNA to controlling metabolism, hormone balance, and helping you fight cancer, there is no doubt that plants offer some of the greatest hope in curbing the tidal wave of chronic degenerative disease and optimizing your long-term health. And with us today is one of the foremost experts on this topic in the world today. Our focus is natural medicine, and we are here with Dr. Michael Murray. He's a naturopathic doctor who has dedicated his life to educating physicians, patients, and the general public about the tremendous healing power of nature. Dr. Murray has personally collected over 65,000 articles from the scientific literature, and this provides strong evidence on the effectiveness of diet, vitamins, minerals, herbs, and other natural measures in the maintenance and health in the human body and in the treatment of disease. Dr. Murray is a graduate faculty member and serves on the Board of Regents of Bacterial University. It's a nonprofit private university at the forefront of the natural health, arts, and sciences. He has written 40 books, which have cumulative sales of over 6 million copies. He's also written numerous articles for major publications that have appeared on, and he's appeared in hundreds of radio and TV programs and lectured to hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. Now, I want to be very clear here. Nothing we are discussing today is medical advice. This is coaching and our own best insights and wisdoms. But as in all things, use your own best judgment and consult with a qualified healthcare professional about your personal medical needs and choices. With all that said, Michael, welcome.
Ocean, it's a great pleasure. Anytime I get to speak with you is always a great pleasure.
Well, we're so happy to be with you right now. Thank you for joining us and taking the time. And let's jump right in here. I have a lot of questions for you, and so too do a lot of our Whole Life Club members. And let me say, this is, just for context, this is a Whole Life Action Hour. So this is a project of Whole Life Club, Food Revolution Network's ongoing membership community. And a lot of our members have submitted questions in advance. That's one of the things members get to do, is to submit questions for our monthly action hours. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how you can join if you want to. So let's jump right in here with some questions I have, and then we'll get to some of the questions from our members, okay? So first of all, what got you involved in the field of natural medicine? How did this come to pass for you?
Oh, wow. Well, you know, most people in our field, Ocean, have a really interesting story. And there's an inner story and an outer story for me. And I tell most people kind of the outer story, but your audience is a little different. I think they think me telling what really got me into natural medicine will really resonate with them. I've really been blessed. And when I was around 19, I had been struggling with my knee. I'd had a ruptured patellar tendon, and I'd had surgery about 1.5 years prior, and it just wasn't responding. And at the urging of my father, I went and saw a naturopathic physician. And this doctor had helped my dad with Bell's palsy. That's a condition where you lose the innervation to the muscles in your face. And this doctor, Ralph Weiss, had literally brought my dad's face back to life with some electroacupuncture and other physical therapy techniques. And my dad thought it might really be helpful for my knee. And it was a miracle for me. And you know, beyond that, it just really resonated with something deep inside me, and I felt, you know, quite guided that this was my calling in life. And the more I read about nutrition and herbs and ways in which you can improve your health through these natural measures, the more it really resonated within me, and I knew that I wanted to be a naturopathic physician. And it's just been a great great path for me, and I'm very thankful for it. And, what I'm most thankful about is, what it's inspired in me and allowed me to touch other people and hopefully make a difference in their lives. Through it all, I'm just filled with so much awe in the power of nature. We all have our greatest devices here, and I think this day and age we have kind of lost sight of what is the greatest technology in the universe, and that technology is nothing that man has created. That technology is nature, and the way in which we commune with nature in a really deep, profound way on a daily basis is through the food that we eat. And I chose to title my latest book, The Magic of Food, and what I wanted to do there was really crystallize some of these really wondrous ways in which food impacts our physiology, impacts our life, and impacts our health. And I got the idea of titling it The Magic of Food from a quote from Sir Kenneth Clark. He said, who wrote 2001 A Space Odyssey. He said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And we're just scratching the surface and understanding how food works in our body. So it really is magical. And so what I try to do is explain the magic. And I think your audience, they love discovering the way in which nature works to promote health and healing. So I'm thrilled to be here. And it was Sir Arthur Clarke. I don't know why I said Kenneth Clark is another friend of mine. Trying to give him credit for something.
It's a great quote, and there is some fascinating place where science meets wonder, meets awe, and when we truly we have barely scratched the surface of understanding how nature actually works. It's so extraordinary, and whatever your personal beliefs are about evolution or creation, I think we can all probably agree that there is something far beyond human comprehension that is amazing going on in this world. And so when we approach it with curiosity and wonder, I think as humble students, we become capable, I think, of harnessing the powers of life more effectively for good. When we approach it with a kind of hubris and a kind of arrogance, as humans are a little prone to do, and sometimes we create unintended consequences. I want to ask you something that one of our members asked about, and it struck me as a great place to enter here, which is, what is a naturopathic doctor? And how does that compare to an allopathic doctor? How is it similar, and how is it different? And why did you choose to go into the ND profession?
Right. Naturopathic medicine is a system of medicine that's based upon utilizing nature as much as possible and focusing on the prevention of disease foremost. And then when disease is present, we're trying to restore balance, not simply suppress the symptoms. Our primary goal in naturopathic medicine is to identify the underlying cause, the root cause of a condition, and then remove the obstacles to a cure. And foremost, we're educating and inspiring our patients, and then utilizing all the tools that we have to heal them. It differs from allopathic medicine, which is the conventional medicine in the U.S. right now, and that form is really more of a symptom approach and trying to treat disease, whereas naturopathic medicine is about promoting health and wellness. It's just a different worldview. It's very similar to what's going on in psychology right now. And in psychology for many years, it was a disease model, putting a label on a disease. And with this advent of positive psychology and a more wellness-based model, they're studying healthy people and trying to emulate their psychology to promote health and wellness and happiness and joy and all those positive emotions, and a much more common experience for most people. So I think it's just a difference in philosophy. One is a disease model treating disease, the other is a promotion of health.
Got it. Thank you for that. When you look at the world of natural medicine and some of the plants and natural approaches that are out there, are there a few that really stand out to you? like, wow, this is so important, and it has not yet been adopted widely, but it really, really should be?
Oh man, for me, Ocean, health is like the blind men and the elephant. Where we can look at one particular thing or one particular aspect of health and make an argument that that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But when you sit back and look at the whole picture, you realize that they're all just a piece of the puzzle. It's like we all are familiar with our cars, and what's the most important part of the car?
Yeah. The one that's broken.
The one that's broken. Exactly. And so we're very complex systems. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned, in my career is that everything is interrelated, and we have to pay attention to everything. And I got some wonderful patients. One of my favorite patients was a gentleman that had a very rare genetic disorder. He was the longest lived person ever with this condition. And the dedication, the commitment, just the will to live in this man was incredible. And I asked him once, I said, it was heartbreaking to watch his body deteriorate, and yet he was still fighting. And I asked him, why? And he told me, Mike, all I can do is all I can do. So why wouldn't I do all that I can do?
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten that. And, it's humbling. We, most of us are really blessed in that we don't have a major health obstacle to overcome. Most of the health problems in America are self-induced. They're fork-induced or, choice-induced. And it's sad that people make bad choices and take their health for granted. And you don't really realize how much people do that until you see somebody that's really fighting something that where their deck is stacked against them. And here this person would do anything to have lived a longer life, and yet most people throw away their lives with the choices that they make.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And this life is so precious, and it's more vulnerable than we tend to realize. They say everyone thinks they're going to live forever until they realize they won't, and for a lot of people, by the time they realize how immortal they are, it's too late. The status quo has taken its toll, which is why we say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, perhaps even more than a pound of cure.
Sure.
And along the way, there are certain herbs and compounds that can really help us to detoxify and clean up the mess, and also help to revitalize us. So I'm curious, since you've made the study of herbs something of an art and science in your life, what are some of the herbs that you think could do the most good for the most people?
Well, I tell you, I think we're about ready to hit a spice revolution. Spices have been at the forefront of our culinary experience, and remember the spice trade. That's really what led to discovery of America. And I just don't think that spices in general have really reached their highest level of appreciation. We're starting to see it, right? We're starting to see spices, really led, I think, by the interest in turmeric and curcumin, its active component. But ginger's been around a long time. I'm just shocked. When you look at I'm primarily a medical researcher. I collect information from the medical literature, and I try to digest it and put it out in a way that really people can digest and understand and apply in their life. There are over 100 double-blind, placebo-controlled studies on ginger as a pain reliever and anti-inflammatory compound. Ginger is easy to incorporate into our diets. I mean, we can.
Yes.
I like ginger shots. I mean, fresh ginger shots. I don't think it gets much more powerful than that. but you know, as you asked me that question, what herb is underutilized or underappreciated? You know, my mind quickly went to ginger, because I think in America we have xenophilia. That means we love things that are exotic, and sometimes things that are common, like the apple, we take for granted.
Yeah.
And I think ginger's kind of fallen into that. And it's such a powerful medicine. If you look at all the different applications of use, not only for pain and inflammation, arthritis, migraine headaches, etc. You know, it has great effects on reducing our risk for cardiovascular disease. It has significant anti-cancer effects. You know, there's as long a list of applications for ginger as there is for its cousin, turmeric. But if you go to the grocery store, you can now get fresh turmeric root, but compare the price to ginger root. It's much greater, you know. I think you could make the argument that that ginger is the more powerful of the two, but it's certainly the lesser appreciated of the two, even though the clinical evidence for ginger as a food is much stronger than turmeric as a food.
Yeah, well, partly because turmeric the curcumin in turmeric is not particularly bioavailable unless it's combined with black pepper or some source of fat, or it's processed in some way. It doesn't necessarily have its intended effect. So whereas with ginger, you don't necessarily need the accompanying compounds for it to be potent. There have been some interesting studies done on ginger and migraine headaches, actually, which is particularly interesting to me because I have some friends who are facing migraine headaches and they keep coming back. And the studies have shown that it was actually more effective than any of the drugs available for migraines, but without any negative side effects, only positive side effects. So there's quite a bit of wonder to be found in nature's pantry, in nature's pharmacy, rather, I think. Ginger's a good one. Obviously, you mentioned turmeric, and you know it's also potent. Well, tell me about another one.
You know, I mean, all those spices, you know, cinnamon, black pepper, cardamom, you know, all those spices, I think they're going to have their day. And I think that we need in America just a greater focus on incorporating herbs and spices into our daily lives to a much greater extent.
Yeah.
And I devoted a full chapter in the magic of food to that. But yeah, I think we're going to see that be the next wave. You know, Ocean, we see a lot of things in the nutrition field that is, I think, we get these growing fads that really have very little meat in terms of science or rationale behind them. There's really strong science with herbs and spices. And so I think they have not yet hit their day as being factors to really focus on in their health. I mean, you know, my God, are you kidding me? Do you think bone broth is going to create the same sort of effects as some sort of curry soup? Or you know, it's not. It doesn't have the same degree of medicinal components. It's just not. You know, but yet it became a phenomenon, right? Well, we haven't seen the herb and spice phenomenon yet, but thankfully, with your help, it's going to happen someday.
And with yours, you know, one of the interesting things about herbs and spices is that they add a lot of flavor to our food, and they tend to replace some of the flavor we derive from sugar, salt, and fat. So in America, we have made those the cornerstones of our cuisine, whereas in Italy maybe it's basil and oregano and marjoram, and you know in Mexico maybe it's the cilantro, or in other places it's the cardamom, in India it's the turmeric and the curries, and all over the world it's ginger, but in the US it's salt and sugar and oils and deep frying, and you know, but when we add more spices and herbs and flavors to our food, then it actually tastes better and more interesting. And so it can tend to replace some of the flavor we otherwise are deriving from those other things. And so I think that's one of the interesting things, is how we can rewire our taste buds to enjoy those flavors more, and rewire our kitchen habits to utilize them more. And I'll tell you, you got to make friends with your spice cabinet. Get to know those spices. If you've got something that's been in there for 10 or 20 years and you've never used it, maybe it's time to replace it and start fresh. A lot of us have got some cobwebs in our spice cabinet, but get to know it, rotate it, make friends with what's in there, add some new flavors, and reap the benefits.
Oh, that's very well said. You know, we're talking about our love for nature, basically, when we're talking about herbs and spices. And I think it's really, there's a lot of things I think are really interesting about our taste buds. For example, there's a few examples I can think of. If we look at capsicum, red peppers, very prevalent along the equator. Studies have shown that capsicum ingestion helps people tolerate higher temperatures. And what's interesting is that when we start eating more red pepper, our desire to eat more spicy food actually starts ramping up, as well as our tolerance, which I think is really interesting, because I think it's nature is tempting us, and then it's guiding us so that we have an increased consumption of these beneficial compounds in red pepper. Dark chocolate is like that too. If you can take someone who's like loves white chocolate or milk chocolate, and you can just start it, easing them up to a higher percentage of cacao in there, their taste buds will change. I mean, I can admit I prefer nearly 100% cacao now, and I love that bitter taste. Now, I've been eating dark chocolate for many, many years, but I think if you talk to people, they will talk about their progression of tolerance and kind of desire to have stronger chocolate over time. So I think nature's trying to guide us to healthier choices.
The same is true with vegetables.
Yes.
Taste buds change. So to some people who don't eat a lot of vegetables, perhaps some of the people watching right now are in this camp, they taste bitter.
Arugula.
Your saliva actually evolves in relationship to them and produces proteins that change the way that it tastes, so that as you get more comfortable with vegetables and as you eat more of them, they come to taste sweeter.
Yeah, arugula is a great example. I mean, I grew up in a small town in Southern Oregon. We didn't have arugula. Now you can, I've fallen in love with these microgreens. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
these are little baby versions of all of our vegetables. And I think they're higher in nutritional profile. And I think they're much more flavorful. It's like I made myself a salad yesterday that was just phenomenal. Just a simple thing. I mean, it takes less than a couple of minutes now, because you have all these nice packaged organic greens, and I like these microgreens, and I like I had daikon radish sprouts, so I'm adding all these really powerful sprouts and microgreens, and put some avocado in there and blueberries and some almonds. Oh my God, I tell you, that was, I love eating things like that because I know it's doing so much good for my body. But I'm telling you, it's such a different experience now compared to what we had available, not too long ago. 20 years ago, we didn't have that same sort of variety. And as far as these microgreens, I think it's probably been, maybe within the last 5 years, we're seeing the assortments that we have now.
Absolutely. And how wonderful that the world is changing in many ways in response to consumer demand and consumer interest. The food industry has made a lot of money selling us junk. And I was recently having the opportunity to meet with senior executives from Coca-Cola and Mars and Nestle and Unilever and some of the other major food corporations. And one of the things that I learned in those conversations, which may sound obvious, but I hadn't really thought about it from their perspective, was that these companies were really trying to respond to consumer demand. And in their experience, junk food sells if it's cheap and tasty, right? And they don't stay up all night trying to figure out how to poison our kids. But they are responding to market demand. And as they said to me, it won't do any of us any good if every company that tries to do the right thing goes out of business, you know, because they're making food that's too healthy for the consumer, and suddenly they lose market share and fall apart. So some of them are walking a fine line. Now, I happen to think that some of them are profiting off of the worst instincts of humans, which is to say they're profiting off of addicting us to their products. And so I do have an ethical and moral problem with that. However, I recognize that they are part of a larger system, and we can't just blame them without taking some responsibility for our own consumer choices. And I recognize that as we create a stronger marketplace for healthier foods, we're shifting the way food is grown, the way it's processed, the way it's marketed even, to establish new market share for healthier options. And I think that's pretty exciting.
It's awesome. I mean, you know, your dad and I have seen a lot of the changes in our food supply since we embarked on our individual missions of trying to improve the food that's available and the food choices that people are making. You know, it's just we live in a dichotomous world because
Yes.
we've never had the availability of these healthy foods that we do now. It's fantastic, but then we're in that stage where people are still, you know, stuck on making choices that aren't promoting health with their diet. So you know, it's going to change. I mean, and I think it's going to change from within. You know what's cool about, you know, many of those executives, and I'm sure that you've met some of the same people that I have. A lot of them are really well educated, and many of them are very health conscious, and they themselves would never eat the products that they're making.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to shift to, we've got a lot of questions about people with some specific conditions.
Okay.
And of course, we're not giving medical advice here, but I would love to ask your insights on some of these topics. One person asked, and they were anonymous, they said, are naturopathic therapies effective for people with hypothyroidism? And if so, which ones have been proven to be most successful? Any comments on that?
Yeah, the most common cause of hypothyroidism now, I mean, before, you know, it could have been iodine deficiency, but now it's an autoimmune condition, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And there's a lot we can do to prevent that. But once that's taken hold and someone has developed hypothyroidism, where that's a medical condition where their body is just not making thyroid hormone. It's analogous to a type 1 diabetic that is not making insulin. So we have to give that type 1 diabetic insulin, and we have to give that person with hypothyroidism thyroid hormone. It's a natural therapy. So you know, hormone replacement therapy is key to the medical treatment of hypothyroidism. We might be able to see some improvements in mild cases through some dietary changes. The chief ones, you know, making sure you have an adequate intake of iodine, and then, you know, trying to reduce that autoimmune process. You might see some benefits in subclinical or mild hypothyroidism, but in most cases where a person has a TSH above 3, that means significant hypothyroidism. They generally need to be on a thyroid hormone replacement therapy, just like a type 1 diabetic would need insulin.
Yeah, absolutely. Got it. Thank you.
It's a naturopathic treatment. You're giving the body the tool it needs to be healthy, and you're giving it something that's natural.
Yeah. Thank you. We had a question from Marceline who said, I would love to eat 100% plant-based diet, but my IBS makes it very difficult for me to digest legumes and soy. What are some of your thoughts about how I might overcome this challenge?
Yeah, what we know about the irritable bowel syndrome now is it used to be kind of a wastebasket diagnosis. If you had IBS, it's because they ruled out everything else. As far as what causes IBS, there are a number of different things that can be related to. I mean, there's a strong connection between our emotions and our mind and our gut. There's a strong connection between food intolerances and IBS. But what they're finding out nowadays is that many people with IBS have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. They have an overgrowth of organisms in the small intestine. Small intestine is designed to be relatively sterile because that's where we absorb the food, the nutrients from the food. The food should be digested there and then we absorb it. If microorganisms infiltrate the small intestine, they start getting to the food before we have a chance to break it down or absorb it. So it creates a lot of gas, indigestion, and maybe pain and alternating constipation and diarrhea, things that we relate to the irritable bowel syndrome. So if a particular food is identified as being problematic, in this case legumes, soy and lentils and other legumes, then a person may benefit by taking digestive enzymes that are rich in alpha galactosidase. This enzyme breaks down some of the basically fibers or sugars that are in these legumes that are gas producing. So again, if we break down food properly, we can eliminate a lot of the gas, indigestion, and irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. So if he's really committed to a plant-based diet and is having some issues with these foods that he wants to include, then he can take these digestive enzyme formulas that are rich in the alpha galactosidase. I work for Enzymatica. We're the leading supplier of digestive enzymes. We have a product called Digest Gold that is kind of the gold standard in digestive enzymes, but we have specific products for these isolated food intolerances as well.
Yes, thank you for that. We heard from Harlan, who said we have homocysteine levels of 13 to 15. What is the concern about elevated readings, and how does one lower them? Harlan is saying all other blood results are in the normal range.
Yeah, homocysteine is a metabolite of the sulfur amino acids, methionine and cysteine, and elevations. This compound is associated with basically increasing our risk for cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's disease. So we don't want this floating around. Some people are prone to elevations in homocysteine. And if this is a healthy person that's doing everything right, getting a good intake of B vitamins from their diet, they may be, I don't know if your audience, if you've talked about methylation disorders, and there's a genetic phenotype where people don't methylate folic acid properly, and that tends to lead to health elevations in homocysteine. So these people need to take a special form of folic acid called methylfolate, 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate or methylfolate. It turns out that about somewhere between 5 and 20% of Caucasians have this methylation disorder. For some racial groups, it's much higher. Like in Mexicans, it's up to about 50%. So Hispanics could be up to 50%. So there's certain populations where it's really a problem. I don't know Harlan's background, but I would be concerned if everything else was good and just this one lab value. I would suspect that he has that. That genotype that is linked to higher homocysteine levels. So I would recommend taking a methylated form of not only folic acid but B12. And there are a number of companies that offer those supplements. And the dosage should be at least 400 micrograms for the folic acid and at least 200 to maybe even 400 micrograms of the methyl B12.
Thank you. You just used folic acid and folate kind of interchangeably, but I think it might be good to distinguish. I think you're talking about folate in this case, right? As the third form. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, you know, I'm getting nervous because I think we're going to see a major public health crisis come to light. Folic acid doesn't exist in nature, and folic acid is the predominant form of folate that's being used for mass, food fortification. And for good reason, low levels of folate or folic acid are linked to neural tube defects. So there was this big push for folic acid supplementation. The problem is that some people don't metabolize folic acid very efficiently, and folic acid may carry some risks for these people, including an increased risk for cancer. And as I said, for certain racial groups, that risk may be very, very high. So I don't think, did you ever see the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin?
I did not.
Okay, so anyway, he developed this little contraption that goes on to eyeglasses so they wouldn't fall down a person's nose. So it was like a little contraption at the bridge of the eyeglass. But then, so he made all this money, but then he started getting sued because people were going blind. So it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it ended up being, not a good thing for a lot of people. And I think that's what we're going to see with folic acid. It's not for everybody, and there's no, we were talking about the methylfolate that I recommended for Harlan to get that homocysteine level. I think that's the safe way to go. If you don't know, if you haven't had the genetic test to see if you are a poor methylator, I think. And you have an elevation in homocysteine, I would highly recommend using the methylfolate form.
Yeah, thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
Colleen said, I always hear doctors say you must get food allergy and intolerance testing done if you have leaky gut or autoimmune issues. But I've had this done, and some of the foods that came up on my test that I supposedly should have no reaction to are the ones that I do have reactions to. Have you found these tests to be reliable? Also, if I am eating an all-organic diet, but the foods they test with are not organic, would that make a difference in the results?
Yeah, we don't have all the answers as to why sometimes people seem to be reacting to foods that they shouldn't be reacting to. I've always kind of held the elimination diet with careful food reintroduction as kind of the gold standard. I was talking about digestive enzymes earlier. In order for, like the classic example is lactose intolerance. So lactose is milk sugar, and if you don't have the enzyme lactase to break down that milk sugar, it can lead to gas, bloating, indigestion, and even diarrhea. But if you have that enzyme or you take it supplementally, then the body can break down that lactose and it causes no reaction. I think a lot of times what happens in people that have food intolerances and sensitivities is they have an inherent weakness in their digestive system. Most of us have a weak link of some sort, and for many people it's their digestive system. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, probably said it well. He said, all health begins in the gut. And he also said all disease begins in the gut. And we need to focus on not so much the food sometimes with these people, but how they're breaking down food. If we can help them break down the food properly, then they can eliminate the intolerance and break down the food properly so they don't develop antibodies to these food components and trigger autoimmunity and whatnot. So what I've seen happen a lot, Ocean, is people go and see doctors and they get tested for food allergies, or they get put on some crazy diets. And what happens is their foods that they can tolerate just keeps getting reduced and reduced and reduced, and then until finally they can't tolerate anything. because you're not treating the cause. The cause is not the food. The cause is their inability to break down the food. So let's focus on how we can improve digestion, and we can use digestive aids like hydrochloric acid, various digestive enzymes, various herbs. There's ways in which we can improve digestive function and help break down the food so it doesn't cause gas, bloating, indigestion, and even more serious health conditions.
Yes, thank you. Heidi said, what foods are best to eat to give me some energy? I don't think she means caffeine. Obviously, we all know about that. But what foods will give more sustained energy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, we were talking about. I'm gonna answer that question, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about biochemical individuality. One of my favorite studies was a study that was looking at caffeine intake or coffee intake and cardiovascular disease. If you look at the literature, it's mixed. Some studies show that coffee consumption causes high blood pressure and heart attacks. Other studies show, no, it actually is good for the heart and reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease. So researchers decided to do a very good study where they asked the question, maybe it's not the caffeine, maybe it's the way someone breaks down caffeine. So they divided people into groups, either slow metabolizers of caffeine or fast metabolizers of caffeine. And I'll just summarize the key finding. If someone was a fast metabolizer of caffeine and they drank 2 to 4 cups of coffee a day, they would reduce their risk of having a heart attack or stroke by 27%.
Yeah.
Now, if they were a slow metabolizer of caffeine and they drank 2 to 4 cups of coffee a day, they would actually increase their risk of having a heart attack or stroke by 250%. Okay,
wow.
That's amazing. So the reason a lot of these studies that show green tea and coffee are protective against, you know, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, a lot of them were done in Asia. And in Asia, about 90% of people are fast metabolizers of caffeine. Now, if you do a study mainly in Caucasians, you're not going to show much of an effect because for every, you know, if you have half equal amount of people with being slow and fast metabolizers, the negative effects of caffeine in a slow metabolizer are 10 times greater than the beneficial effects in a fast metabolizer. So there's going to be some interference there. So the bottom line that I'm trying to illustrate here is that we're all individuals, and that a lot of the conventional wisdom is based upon what we see in very large populations that don't have any bearing on what's good for you or me as individuals. So that's a preface to say that for many people, caffeine is actually a good thing. I prefer natural sources, clean organic coffee or clean green tea. You know, those are great natural sources of caffeine that can cause a boost in energy. If we look globally, just about every culture had some sort of stimulant-based beverage that they used on a daily basis as a way to boost their energy levels. So I don't think it's a bad thing for people that can handle caffeine. How do you know if you're a slow or fast metabolizer? The slow metabolizers know, they just don't like it. Because
they drink coffee after 3 in the afternoon, they're up all night.
Yeah, and even sometimes they can't tolerate even any caffeine. Even sometimes they're so sensitive, decaf is an issue for them. So
yeah,
you know, and so those people, and is it Heidi that asked the question? I don't know. She may not. One of the problems with regular frequent caffeine consumption, particularly in slow metabolizers, is they've done these studies in mice and rats where they gave them habitual consumption amounts of caffeine, and they showed over time that their energy levels, their ability to swim for longer periods of time, their swimming time just kept going down. So, you know, I think sometimes we need to kind of reset our caffeine tolerance. But some things, things that I like, I think it really starts with breakfast. I think sometimes our breakfast choices are really not conducive for having energy levels, higher energy levels throughout the day. For some people, if they have oatmeal, for example, in the morning, a complex carbohydrate, that complex carbohydrate, that will lead to what happens when we eat carbohydrates is that insulin's released, and it forces our muscles to uptake not only glucose but amino acids that compete with tryptophan for transfer into the brain. So when we eat a carbohydrate, our levels of tryptophan availability for transport into the brain goes up really high, and so people will have some sort of carbohydrate in the morning for breakfast, and they'll be tired. They'll be tired throughout the whole day. They may be better off using or eating a higher fat meal or a higher protein meal for breakfast as opposed to a higher carbohydrate. So I find that blood sugar control is a big key in many people's energy levels, and so staying away from foods that are going to cause a spike in blood sugar is really a good idea for higher energy levels.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a third option. You know what I had for breakfast this morning? Steamed collards. Call me weird, but I enjoy it. I had steamed collards for breakfast.
Oh, steamed collards, yeah.
Yeah, a little unusual, I know. It doesn't fit on the typical breakfast menu, but when you love vegetables, more the better, pretty much, right?
I love traveling through even Europe, but if you travel through Asia and you're staying at a nice hotel and you eat at the buffet, oh man, it's fantastic, and it's just such an array of different types of foods than what we would consider breakfast foods. And I might have a bowl of bok choy soup or whatever, and not a bad choice.
Cool, thank you. We got lots of questions, so let's see how kind of rapid fire we can get through a bunch of them here.
I'll keep the answer short then.
All righty. So B said, do you know anything about amino acid therapy for Parkinson's disease?
Well, with Parkinson's disease, right now, the drug of choice is Cinament, and this is an L-dopamine amino acid based therapy. So if you eat a high protein diet, it actually interferes with this drug being able to work effectively. So using essential amino acids as supplements and then going on a low protein diet helps that drug work better and produces a better clinical response in patients with Parkinson's disease. So I support that 100%.
Thank you. Sally said, everywhere I turn, I hear warnings about the dangers of dairy, but she's asking whether raw versus pasteurized is significant, whether how the animals are raised is significant, whether goat and sheep dairy is different than cow, and generally, and also plant-based, and wanting some insight around these distinctions. What's your take?
Wow. I'm going to share some personal opinions. I pretty much stayed away from dairy most of my life. And a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I was in Sicily, and I went down and they had a breakfast buffet. Again, I love their breakfast buffets. And they had about 20 different types of cheeses and all sorts of artisan cheeses. And so I sampled a little bit of many of these. And I was like, oh my God, we don't have anything like this in America. We do, but not to the variety and volume that they do there. I mean, we're stuck that when you're looking at what's available as far as cheese goes for most Americans, it's really sad compared to all the varieties they have. Italy has the highest per capita consumption of cheese in the world, and they have a great variety. And I think there was, my gut tells me that if we look at everyone's focusing on the microbiome these days, and we kind of got the idea that people are only able to improve their microbiome through fermented foods and through probiotics. But if we look at historically really powerful ways in which people probably had their microbiome affected, it was probably through cheese consumption. I think there will be a greater appreciation for I don't know, would we say consciously produced cheeses? I don't think the mass-produced cheeses in the U.S. are probably healthy, but I do think that artisan cheeses and maybe alternative milk sources, sheep and goat, they maybe have some better attributes. I'm still not a big cheese eater, but I gained an appreciation, and something tells me that there may be something to cheese consumption having beneficial effects on our health.
It could be. There isn't a lot of data for it, but that's also because the studies have been done on what most dairy products are, which is, from animals that live in abject misery and are not eating their natural diet or living in natural ways, and their calves are ripped away from them at birth, and they're not treated too well. Many of them live on concrete their whole lives, but it may well be that grass-fed cows that live in a natural setting and are treated well, and if their milk is fermented in certain ways, it may be a totally different thing. I think that because we don't have the data, we have our own instincts, and
right.
I tend to prefer not to consume dairy myself because humans are the only species that consumes the milk of another species or that consumes any milk after infancy, and so it seems like a somewhat acquired taste, functionally speaking, but not particularly natural. Although we have co-evolved with cows for some thousands of years now. But in the arc of human history, it hasn't really been a part of the human experience for all that long. So I'm cautious about it, and I'm concerned about the way that the cows are treated and about the environmental impacts of it. But I think the jury's probably still out on the health impacts of dairy from cows that are treated right.
I agree. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Sally also said, I'm concerned about the amount of almond milk consumed in our country because almonds are so thirsty and so many are coming from California. And I'll actually touch on that because we ran an article on this recently.
Oh, good.
90% of the world's almonds are grown in one state of the United States, which is California. And they do use about 10% of the state's water, actually. Yeah. So it's significant. However, when you compare the amount of water it takes to produce dairy milk to the amount that's used to produce almond milk, it's about the same, actually, per gallon. And so anybody who chooses to eschew almond milk for dairy milk is not doing the environment any good turn. But we could certainly look at growing almonds in other places, I think, and that wouldn't be a bad idea for humanity to look at. But I think almonds are overall beneficial, and there's a lot of wonderful things about them. So I haven't turned away from them, but I recognize everything comes with its trade-offs.
I think these plant milks are very, very interesting. We're seeing all sorts of different variants, and there's all sorts of different techniques in producing them, and they have different nutritional profiles. What I love seeing, Ocean, is that we have more palatable choices today than ever before. I mean, trust me, the soy milks, rice milks, nut milks that were available, 10 years ago weren't as good as they are today. So we're seeing improvements, and I think that's all good.
I think so too. We had a question from Linda who said, I'm taking 2,500 micrograms of methyl B12 daily, but MCV 97.5, MCHC 32.1 suggests malabsorption. Could it be the vitamin C taken right after or something else? Any suggestions?
It could be something else. The MCV, that's telling us the size, and 97.5 is not all that bad. Folic acid is also required for those red blood cells to divide properly. So it may not be just the B12. Anyone on a vegan diet needs to be taking supplemental B12, and I recommend the methyl form, the methyl B12. I think that's a real advantage. It may not be a bad idea for people to be with a vegetarian diet. You're getting very good levels of natural folate usually. But if someone is showing, like Harland had the elevated homocysteine, and now we have an elevation in MCV, I would opt to supplement with that methyl folate along with the B12. 400 micrograms would be sufficient.
Got it. Thank you. Elizabeth said, I'm very confused about lectins. I heard a doctor talk about the harm they cause in the body and that they're found in so many foods like legumes and nightshades.
Yeah.
Would you address this issue?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I don't think it's much of an issue. I think it's a tempest in a teapot. I think the issues, first of all, lectins are compounds that are deactivated by heating and within our gastrointestinal tract. There's no evidence that lectins are ever absorbed into our body. So a lot of the fear campaign against lectins it doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. I think if you look globally at areas where they have a high legume diet, generally we see very healthy populations. So I think it's a problem, and a lot of times people with blood sugar issues are being told to stay away from legumes. And legumes, I think, they're really a great food for most people with diabetes. We can always have someone check their blood sugar before or after any food to see what the impact is. But there's a lot of good data, clinical data, showing a higher legume intake is very helpful in controlling blood sugar levels. So I just think I think, and you may have a different opinion on it, but I think it's misguided enthusiasm. I think some people may have some issues with some of these foods, but I don't think it's due to the lectins.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree. You know, Dr. Stephen Gundry has made quite a bit of book sale activity and supplement sale activity off of essentially vilifying some of the foods that study after study is telling us are beneficial for most people. Obviously, there's no one-size-fits-all thing that's true about everybody. Right. But, you know, he's sort of blaming our health crisis on legumes and tomatoes and nightshades. And the studies seem to say that most people do better eating more of those foods. And he's not pointing out, you know, I kind of think sugar and processed meats have a little something to do with our health crisis, you know, but for some reason he's turning it in another direction, and that concerns me. I don't think most people need to be scared of lectins.
Yeah, what they need to be afraid of, I don't want to spread fear, but I just want to get this point across. The greatest threat to human health today is not sugar or viruses or anything like that. It's this ever increasing environmental load of toxic chemicals that we're dumping on our food supply. And you can make a stronger case that the epidemics that we're seeing in diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, and cancer are more related to these environmental toxins than you can for any dietary factor. So we need to be vilifying the right things and not the wrong things. And yeah, I mean, we can make one man's food is another man's poison. That's true. But we need to focus on the bigger issues like you all have been doing for kind of the inception of the food revolution. It's just great. It's just been great to see the growth of that movement, and because it's been mindful and thoughtful, and it keeps focus on the bigger issues that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And we're certainly in this together. We've got a few more questions I'd love to see if we can get to, and I know we're nearing the end of our time here. Patricia asked about calcium derived from red marine algae, asking if that is effective at 1,000 milligrams per day. And also, are there any other natural supplements besides magnesium that are beneficial for promoting bone density?
Yeah, bone density, there's a lot of things that can help promote bone density. I think again, it's sometimes it's more important of what we avoid, and staying away from the things that rob our bones, sugar, salt, phosphates from sodas. That's all really important to stay away from. There's a lot of research right now on vitamin K2. This is an active form of vitamin K that anchors calcium into our bones. So it's not just a matter of supplementing calcium. And if you look at the data on calcium supplementation alone isn't very compelling for prevention of osteoporosis. And there's some issues with calcium supplementation, particularly if it doesn't also have vitamin K2. So I think K2 is really a key nutrient for that healthy bone.
Thank you. 2 more questions. So we have Bonnie asking, saying your recipes in the Whole Life Club are awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Bonnie. That's great to hear.
That's good.
My question to Dr. Murray is this. I've been seeing an integrative medical team since January for microscopic colitis and SIBO. They practically promised they would help me back to health. 8 months later, I find that not so the case. What's the difference between integrative and naturopathic?
Yeah, integrative is generally medical doctors that are integrating some natural approaches. I think there's a fad treatment of SIBO. We've seen this entity kind of parade itself under different labels over the decades. Chronic candidiasis and before that hypoglycemia, whatever. And I've seen people really get messed up by following some of these dietary treatments. And you know what? The most common first step dietary treatment is a FODMAP diet. So this basically you're telling people to stay away from all these great foods that there are some things on FODMAP, sugar and whatnot that you should get rid of. But basically anything that has a prebiotic effect is being told for people to stay away from. And the problem in SIBO, there's several problems, but we have to restore the microbiome, and we're not giving it any food. And so what happens is that they throw antibiotics at it. I don't know all the treatments that she's had. I've written extensively on this. There's information. If she goes to my website, drmurray.com, and just goes to the search and types in SIBO, I've written some recent articles on what I feel is a more rational approach to SIBO, which is using the strategy is to kind of reinforce what natural measures we have in our intestinal tract that keeps that small intestine sterile, and then we want to feed that microbiome in a way that promotes health. I don't know if you've heard this from a lot of people on the keto diet, Ocean, but a lot of people are following this fad of eating either paleo or keto, and what I'm seeing is that they're suffering from more and more intestinal issues. And I wrote an article, my latest newsletter was on blueberries being effective in osteoarthritis. But the one before that, I wrote about what I think will be kind of the next probiotic superstar. It's not available as a probiotic. Through advances in understanding what's growing in our intestinal microbiome through improved DNA sequencing and whatnot, we now have an awareness that there are all these organisms that are really, really important. And one of them is called Akkermansia muciniphila. And if you're on a keto diet, it's death to the level of this critical component of our microbiome. It's given that name mucinphilia because it loves our mucin, and it helps our intestinal cells make mucin and offer a protective barrier. If you don't have Akkermansia muciniphila, you don't have a protective barrier. If you don't have a protective barrier, you got leaky gut. If you don't have Akkermansia muciniphila, you increase your risk for diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's disease. So it's a very important organism. We need to feed it, not starve it out of our body. And that's what a lot of people are doing through the dietary choices that they're making for SIBO. So go to my website, drmurray.com, do a search for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO, and you'll see some of my recommendations. And I think those recommendations will serve you better than what you've been on for 8 months.
Thank you. And again, that's Dr. D-O-C-T-O-R Murray, MURRAY.com. Last question from Robin says, I'm taking supplements, vitamins and minerals based on nutritional deficiency test results. And I noticed when I went to the bathroom number 1, it shows bright yellow, and also my bowel movement shift as well. It doesn't feel like the right kind of bowel movement. I wonder if this has anything to do with the supplements I'm taking. And I'm curious whether it matters where I get supplements from. There are more expensive, higher quality supplements perhaps in health food stores, or is it better to take cheaper ones? Any thoughts? And might this be connected to the color of the urine?
Yeah, you always kind of get what you pay for. I like the mission of many of the companies in the health food industry. It's changed a bit. I mean, it's commercialized. A lot of the original entrepreneurs and kind of zealots that got into the health food industry have sold out, but there's still a lot of good companies. And so I encourage people to get into their local health food store and get on a good quality multiple. The yellow color is most often due to riboflavin, which is a B vitamin. It's just because you take it and your urine turns yellow, it doesn't mean that you didn't absorb it. It meant that you absorbed it, your body was full, and it just got rid of the excess. So it's doing its job. Don't worry about that fluorescent yellow urine. It's not expensive urine. It's good, healthy urine.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, we're nearing the end of our time. I want to thank you so much for your wisdom and your decades of research, your 65,000 articles that you've researched, and for your 40 books and your care for human beings and health and what's possible for us to truly thrive. You are a pillar and a source of wisdom that's deeply needed in these times. And I thank you for really combining the insights of science and the scientific method with understanding nature and the wonders of nature and the magic of food. You are really an expression of the integrative approach to health and healing, and we thank you so much for joining us. Okay. And I want to also let everybody who's with us right now know that this is a project of Whole Life Club, welcoming, Whole Life is welcoming healthy organic lifestyle empowerment, or WHOLE, it's an acronym. And we have a monthly action hour. We have recipes, delicious, fabulous Whole Foods plant-powered recipes, 5 new ones every week, an incredible membership community, the opportunity to ask the questions and get the transcripts from action hours like this one and all of the bank of almost 20 we've done so far. And this is all available to you when you join Whole Life Club. So you can check it out. There's a link on the page next to this video, or you can go to WLC, which stands for Whole Life Club, foodrevolution.org/whole to join in today. So go ahead and check it out if you're interested. We'd love to welcome you into this community. It's all about helping us to live this day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out, because at the end of the day, it's not what you do for a day or a week or a month that matters. It's what you do for the whole of your life. And that's what this is a whole life journey. So again, thank you to all of our Whole Life Club members and all of the folks who are joining us today who are perhaps not yet members. And thank you so much to Dr. Murray for your brilliant leadership and wisdom. It's been a pleasure to share this time with you.
Thank you.
When it comes to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illness, what really matters isn't how many books you read, how many webinars you attend, or how much you know. What really matters at the end of the day is what you eat and how you live. The science has given us what we need to know. Now it's time for action. It's time to implement and optimize your healthy lifestyle. It's time to get results. It's time to say goodbye to confusion and hello to clarity. It's time to say goodbye to bad habits and hello to good ones. It's time to fall in love with foods that love you back. It's time to join a community that will support you in achieving your goals. It's time for Whole Life Club. Click the link to find out more and to join in now.